When you come to the land that Hashem your God gives to you, do not learn to do like the abominable practices of these nations around you. But Rashi says something here very fascinating. It's a beautiful, very interesting law. So you're not allowed to learn the idolatrous ways. So you're allowed to learn in order to understand and to instruct. That is to say, to understand their acts, to understand their acts and to see how wrong these acts are, and to teach your children. This is a ritual of the nations. So the point is that you're not allowed to study idolatry. Means you're not allowed to study other faiths, but you are allowed to study in order to understand if it is idolatry. So you need to study idolatry in order to give a ruling as to whether it's idolatry, in order to teach your children that this is something you're not allowed to do. This is a problem. It's like how do you like when there's something that's just who censors the censors, or who is the one, like if you have to decide if something is pornography, who's the one who has to look at the pornographic picture to rule that it's not okay? So that's so here we're saying that you're allowed to study the idolatry in order to learn that it is idolatry, in order to learn what is idolatry. I remember when I was a student at Yeshiva College, which goes back over 30 years. Wow. 30 years ago, Baruch Hashem, at Yeshiva College, Rabbi Dr. Norma Lamb of blessed memory, he had what was called dorm talks, and he came to speak to us. And one of the kids raised their hand and said, we're in a college, but they're assigning to us readings in the English classes from a different faith. I don't want to say which faith, from their sacred texts. And that's it's idolatry. So how could you be reading it? How could you assign this to us in your course? So Rabbi Lamb said, you have to know how to be in the world. He said basically it's okay. But then they had a big discussion about it in the newspaper of the college. And the professor said, who was not Jewish, quoted this Rashi. But then the Rosh Yeshiva quoted his own sources and said, a different Rosh Yeshiva said the professor was wrong, obviously. So he's not Jewish. So they had a big argument between the non-Jewish professor and the Rosh Yeshiva in the pages of the college. And a couple of years later, that Rosh Yeshiva had enough, and he left, and he went to study. He went to teach in a more right-wing yeshiva. Anyway, that's how I remember this Rashi. Anyway, why are these practices abominable? Says the next verse, you should not be amongst you somebody who passes his son or his daughter into fire. This is how they are idolatry. This is what was so abominable. Excuse me. That they used to pass their child through fire. Now, what did they actually do? Rashi says, this is how they used to worship. This is what was so abominable about it. And this is how they worshiped Moach. They would make bonfires mikan on both sides, and he would cause his child to pass between the two fires. Now it's interesting. Did the child die when he passed him through the two fires? It never says here directly that he died. It never says that in this Rashi. But it seems to be that he obviously would die, because what would be so bad about passing him through in between two fires if he would just live? I mean, that's not so bad. But it seems that the abominable practice This is why we're commanded to wipe out the idolatry, was because they would kill their children by putting them into the fire. And that's what was so offensive, deeply, deeply offensive. And then kosem kesamim, one who practices kosem in modern Hebrew, a kosem is a magician. So this is kosem kesamim, one who practices divinations. Ezu kosem, what's a kosem, Rashi says? One who holds a stick and he says, shall I go or I not go? My nation would ask its stick, meaning to say they get their direction in life by asking a stick. That's considered to be an abominable practice. They ask the stick for direction. What's the me'onein? Rabbi Akiva says, Elu nosne onos. This refers to those who give seasons, that they say, such and such a season is a good time to start. Meaning to say, hello, Ilan. Meaning to say, they say such and such a season is a good time to start, that they feel like based upon the zodiac. Or say these are illusionists. Like, you ever hear of like Uri Geller, like who bends the spoon? So that's a problem. Like these mentalists would be a problem if they claim that they're really mentalists. But if they say everything we're doing can be explained by magic, by sleight of hand tricks, then it's not prohibited. But if the mentalist really is arguing, yeah, I really have supernatural powers, then you're not allowed to go because that's idolatry. Yeah, Elon.
Why does the Torah hate supernatural powers so much? And like, why would God make it accessible to humans if he's just going to be like, you're killed if you do it?
Okay, so that's a good question. Elon's asking a very good question. So first of all, there's two approaches amongst the commentaries. One approach says that there's nobody who has these types of powers, that it's all false, it's all tricks, and therefore this dark magic is all just a way of tricking people, and so therefore it's offensive because the religion is pure, and somebody who says that he has supernatural powers, but it's really a deviation from religion, is making a perversion of religion. So that's the good afternoon, Greg. Great to see you. Great to see you, Ezra. So that's one approach. Another approach is that no, they really do have these powers. But it says elsewhere, and we just read this last week, that sometimes God makes the people with the prophetic powers, even though it gives the false prophets the powers just to test us, because we want to say that the true path in life is not the path of the miracles, but the path of what the Torah tells us. So sometimes God will send a person with prophetic powers, but we still have to recognize that it's our responsibility to not listen. We shouldn't be deceived by it. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
Very good question, Elon. Excellent question. And the Menachesh, this is Pito Nafo Mipiv. This is somebody who reads omens. Like, for example, if his bread fell from his mouth, he says, oh, now I have to buy this stock today. It's a good buy because the bread fell from my mouth. You know what we call that? A good buy. Goodbye to your house, goodbye to your car, goodbye to your gym membership. You have no money at the end of the day. So this is a good buy. Three of Siko Baderach, or a deer blocked me on the road, or Makonaf on the other. So these are people who basically run their life on the basis of this superstitious beliefs. This is considered to be an abominable form of idolatry. You had a question, Greg? Oh. What is this? This is an animal charmer. So, by the way, I could tell you, you gather snakes or scorpions or other beasts to one place. Or the show Ov, one who inquires of Ov. This is a type of witchcraft whose name is Pisom, and then he speaks out of his armpit and he raises the dead in his armpit. I want to just say that, there's well-known magician who is Jewish. His father was a rabbi, very, very famous, named Houdini. You ever hear of him? Of course. At one point, Houdini was the most famous man in all the world. Houdini would always say, and Houdini was a very, very, very big student of Maimonides. He had a very big collection of Maimonidean writings. Houdini would say, I promise you that everything I'm doing can be explained by science or sleight of hand. There's nothing supernatural. Then after Houdini's mother died, a famous story happened that there was a very, very famous author in England, like one of the most famous authors. I forget his name. You can look him up, like one of the most famous authors of his time. And he was a deep believer in the power of the people to conjure up people from the dead and to speak to the dead. And so he arranged for what? Oh yeah, Arthur Conan Doyle. No, very, very good, very good. But there was another one also, but I think it was Conan Doyle. I think Eitan is absolutely right. And then this author said that I believe that you could speak to the dead. So he arranged for there to be a seance in New Jersey with Houdini. And these idiots who are doing the seance thought that they could trick Houdini. I mean, this is Houdini. He's the master of all magicians. And Houdini was so furious at this when they did it to him, and he exposed them and he went around. But these people were deeply committed. They believed deeply in the seances. Even like somebody who's just, it's so ironic, Conan Doyle, whose whole career was built on this figure of a detective who was all about science and facts, Sherlock Holmes and deductions, and yet here he is believing in this narishkeit of the seances. So that's just an interesting sidebar. But Eliezer, you had a question?
Well, two things. Like I read this history, I've done for a while. But speaking personally, my mother let me know that my mother let me know when she died. And I've had 6 other direct communications from her that were unmistakable.
Well, that's a little bit different. That's a little bit different to say that you feel the spirit of the dead in your life.
My mother told me where to
Right. Yeah, but what I'm saying is to say you feel the spirit of the dead in your life is different than somebody doing a seance with a Ouija board, where they say that they're talking to you through a Ouija board.
I was when I found out she died, I realized it was late and I had to get here in time because the last start saying gosh. I ran out the door, hit the cold. My mother said in the nicest way I'd ever heard in my entire life. I'll get a jacket. It sounds funny to me.
No, I didn't say it sounds funny. It sounds beautiful, but I think that's very different. Like, why do you think that a Ouija board is the way that's the point? What they're talking about is seances and Ouija boards to say that you feel the presence of the loved one talking to you while you're going about your daily life. That's just the spiritual, that you have this connection with the neshama. That's different than a seance where you bring the person back to life through a Ouija board or a seance and you raise them from the dead to have a conversation with you. That's a fraud.
The same way we listen to God. I mean, whenever I avoid an accident, I know God didn't stop it, but God helped. And I say thank you.
Baruch Hashem.
I've been explained to all my kids. Every single Jewish prayer boils down to one step thing. Thank you.
You're absolutely right about that, for sure. So, okay, so now there is Yudoni. What's the Yudoni? Maybe there are some people who do this at the Rainbow Gathering, Eliezer, that what they do is they take the bone of an animal and they stick it in, they take the bone of an animal whose name is the Yadoa, and they put it in his mouth, and then the bone speaks by means of witchcraft. You ever hear of that?
Never seen it.
Never seen it. Well, we found the one thing that doesn't appear at the Rainbow Gathering. And Doresha Ametim, one who consults with the dead, Kigon, Hamala Bizachruto, Vanishal Begogoet, one who raises the dead and sets him on his male organ, or one who asks questions of a skull. So now we're beginning to see, and what's so dangerous about this is that when you're dealing with the dead, you're really dealing with people in their most vulnerable place. And it can easily be manipulated and taken advantage of. And that's why it's so dangerous.
You know what he said to his wife?
Oh.
When Houdini was done?
What did he say?
He said they came up with a code word. And after he died, this person, I forgot who, and I forgot how much it was a substantial amount of time later, came to her and told her this word.
Oh, you want to know something that when we talk about Houdini, I have to mention my dear friend of blessed memory who was a magician, Bradley Fields. And I miss him. And he was a great guy. So anybody who knew Bradley, we miss him.
I saw him at a Shiva call right there on that road behind him at the bottom of the hill. There was a Shiva call there on the other side of the school campus.
He died around 4 years ago.
Right. Right here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He died at the beginning of COVID. He was one of the first.
The first funeral that I joined you in COVID.
Yeah, he was one of the first people to die from COVID.
He just came back from doing a show in China.
Yeah, it's such a terrible loss. We lost our friend. Anyway, we go on verse 12. Ki toavat Hashem kol oseh eleh. It's abomination to God whoever does these things. B'gal toavot ha'eleh, and on account of these abominations, Hashem lokecha morisha tami panecha. Hashem your God will banish them from before you. Rashi says, even if you do one of these things, you're in violation. Tamim tiyem Hashem lokecha. You have to be pure with God. You have to be wholehearted with Hashem your God. Walk with Him in tamimus. Look ahead to Him. Trust God. Don't delve into the future, but rather kol ma sheyavo elecha. Whatever comes upon you, accept with tamimus, and then you'll be with Him and of His portion. Rashi says, next verse. Ki agayim ha'ela asher ata yoresh otam almononim ve'alkosmim yishma'u. Because these nations, these 7 nations that you have to expel or wipe out from the land of Canaan, that you are going to possess, they listen to these astrologers and these sorcerers. And not so has Hashem your God given for you. Rashi says, God does not allow you to listen to the Mimonim and to the Kosmim. God gave you true prophets and a true oracle, and that's called the Urim V'Tumim. When a prophet will arise from amongst your brothers like me, Hashem will send him, he you shall listen to. So that's an interesting one, because the prophets don't have to be Jewish. There were non-Jewish prophets. And here we're being told that you should only listen to the Jewish prophets. But we know that there were non-Jewish prophets like Bilam. Rashi says, just as I am from your brothers, Yakim lecha tachtai. He will establish other prophets in my place. Meaning to say that there will be a line of prophets. Just like you asked when you gathered at Sinai, saying, Lo seif l'shmoa et kol Hashem, I'll no longer listen to the sound of God. The people, when they gathered at Sinai, they said, we can't listen anymore to God. We need a prophet. By the way, nowadays, what would you say if a person comes along and says he's a prophet? Would you believe him? No, because the Talmud says after the temple was destroyed, the prophecy was given over to whom? Remember who? Fools and children. So now if somebody comes along and says he's a prophet, he's a fool. Rabbi Yosef, you're trying to say something?
Just wanted to say that even when they do say something, we should try to find out which part of what they're saying is the truth and which part is just foolishness. I mean, if he says something like, this is what Hashem told me, right? So like, we're not obligated to listen, but just because they're mentally ill doesn't mean that what they're saying is 100% false.
So you're saying find the truth.
Yeah,
it could be
because we always are
false.
Seeking the truth,
it
right?
Could be 100, just because the guy is saying doesn't mean he has some truth to it. It could be false.
The Talmud says that with every lie there's a little bit of truth, right? So I don't know. I just
Every lie?
nobody will tell you that there's a creature that their face is and they're behind, right? Because
Well,
that's just an example, a physical example. I'm saying the 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 images that we have are based on something that is feasible, because otherwise nobody would ever listen, right? But
I
um,
used to think that was true, but then there's something called Twitter that came along. And
They're like
Uh,
creatures in the deep
okay,
ocean.
but before Twitter, the research that was done with children in Australia that were autistic and were writing words based on what based on their visions and whatever, um, they finally canceled that kind of communication with God, but even when they were doing it, they said that there was some truth to what they were saying. So like,
there's a
the
layer of
children that were
truth. We have
saying that their parents spoke lashon hara, and that's why they were muted, so that they won't have that thing. So
got it. Oh, shkoyach.
sorry.
Yeah, no. Yeah, shkoyach. Very nice. I mean, we should stop here, but I wanted to say one thing before we stop. That God willing,